Assuming we have generated a plan, the next question is, what do we do with this plan? What happens after we have planned? Now, you may think execution is the obvious answer, but there may be other things. For example, we may have generated multiple plans as options that we want to consider, in which case the next step would be to evaluate these plans according to some different criteria, and then select a plan, possibly for execution. But we may also have scenarios where we hope that we will never have to execute those plans. For example, when we come up with emergency response plans. In this case, the planning is really just for preparedness. But the most common thing we do after planning is probably plan execution. And my colleague, Austin Tate, talked about planning and plan execution in the context of real applications earlier this week. So all I need to give you now is probably a brief reminder. Here's a slide that I've used before and that describes our model of plan execution. This model starts with what we've seen a lot on this course, namely with a planning problem. This is described by an initial state and by some objectives, which can be either goals or tasks, depending on whether we do strips-like or HTN-like planning. And then we have a description of our state transition system, which could be methods or strips operators, as we've seen before. And then the planner is the planning algorithm we've looked at most of this course. And the output of that planner is, of course, a plan. This plan is then passed to the controller, which is responsible for the execution of the plan. The controller takes the actions from our plan and somehow makes sure they get executed, which affects our real-world system that somehow changes its state. Of course, the system also changes its state due to events that may occur. And to deal with those events and to ensure that the actions have the desired effects on the state of the real world, the controller has some observations that it can use to monitor the state. Ideally then, everything goes according to plan and the controller has nothing more to do. More realistically, things will go wrong or the unexpected will happen, and that means the plan needs to be changed. And for the plan to change, we need the planner again. But what we have to do is give the planner some additional input, and that is the execution status of the plan so far. Then the planner hopefully can generate a new plan, the controller can start executing that new plan, and so on. So what we really have here is a loop that starts with the initial planning problem, then goes through the controller and the execution and returns to the planner, and may go through this process several times before we end up with the desired objectives achieved in the real world. And to answer my question then, what comes after we plan? Well, the answer is simply more planning. Namely, when things go wrong, we need to do either plan revision, which means we take our existing plan and change parts of it to deal with deviations between the description of our system and the actual system that we are manipulating. Or we can throw away the old plan and start replanning from scratch. One of the issues with the model I just showed you in the previous slide is that there was just a single planner and a single controller. More realistically, however, is a scenario where we have multiple agents, that is, multiple agents which are executing the plan, multiple agents which are controlling the execution, and even multiple agents that are generating the plan. And this, of course, leads to a number of additional problems during plan execution. And one of the problems is that if we have multiple agents execute the actions in a plan, then these actions need to be coordinated between the different agents. As a simple example, remember that our plans contained ordering constraints between different actions. Now, if we assign two actions that are ordered with respect to each other to two different agents, then during plan execution, these two agents need to make sure that first one action is executed and then the other action is executed by the other agent. That means the second agent needs to know when the first agent has finished its activity. So ordering constraints lead to a coordination problem immediately. A similar problem arises when actions use shared resources that have a limited capacity. Again, we need to coordinate the actions if they are assigned to different agents, such that they will never exhaust the capacity that is available. And of course, we may have joint actions. You remember the example earlier from two agents lifting a table with objects on it. The lifting of the table needs to be started and finished together, or the objects will fall off the table. And again, this requires coordination between the two agents. And the most common way to solve coordination problems is, of course, communication between the different agents involved. And the way this is done is that we start with a plan as we've seen it so far, and then we assign the actions in that plan to different agents. And then what we have to do is amend the plan with communication actions that are required for the coordination of the different activities in the plan. So we add more actions to the plan, communication actions, to make sure the execution may go well. Another reason why we may need communication in a plan is that we may have observation actions. So one agent that is part of our plan has to look at the state of the world and recognize something in that state. And then it may need to communicate the result to other agents that may depend on it. But however well we prepare our plan, it can always still go wrong, and that means we have execution failure somewhere in our plan. And the question then is, how can we recover from this failure if we have multiple agents executing the plan? And the easiest way to recover from failure would of course be local plan repair. So if we can modify the plan locally so that only the agent that experienced the failure can somehow fix its part of the plan without affecting other parts of the plan assigned to other agents, then we wouldn't have to talk to other agents before we continue the execution. But often a plan cannot be fixed locally and requires some global change to the plan. That is, a change that affects other agents that have to execute actions in the plan. And then the problem is to propagate those changes through the plan and to other agents. And one important concept here is decommitment. So when we start the execution, we have the agents commit to the actions that they need to execute in the plan. And when things go wrong, they may need to decommit from these actions, and we need to handle this somehow. So, as you can see, there are many problems that may arise during multi-agent plan execution, and all these need to be addressed if we successfully want to execute our plans with multiple agents.